It was late afternoon, and the city was alive, as it always was, traffic honking, people bustling about in a hurry, and the occasional distant siren cutting through the noise. Officer Raymond Carter was wrapping up his shift, his uniform stiff from hours of patrolling the streets. He hadn't planned on anything out of the ordinary, but life had a way of throwing curveballs. He leaned against his patrol car, taking a brief break, the warm breeze ruffling the collar of his shirt. He was no rookie, he'd been on the force for over a decade, seen it all, done it all. Nothing really surprised him anymore. Not the late-night brawls, not the petty thefts, and certainly not the kids loitering around street corners. In fact, he expected to deal with trouble like that every day. But today, there was something different. Carter spotted a figure standing under a flickering street lamp in the distance. A teenager. His hoodie was pulled low, and his posture was too still, too calm, for a typical teenager. Carter's instincts kicked in. He didn't trust that kind of stillness. Probably up to no good, Carter muttered to himself, striding toward the figure with purpose. As he got closer, he saw the boy's face. Ethan. He looked like any other kid. But there was something about his gaze that was unsettling, unusually steady, even defiant, for someone so young. "Hey!" Carter shouted, his voice sharp. "What are you doing here?" Ethan didn't flinch. He simply lifted his head, staring back with cool eyes. "Just waiting," he replied, his voice flat, as if this conversation meant nothing to him. Carter was already irritated. The kid's lack of fear irritated him. Waiting? For who? You know this area's off-limits for loitering, right? Carter's voice grew louder, more authoritative. The teenager shrugged slightly, his eyes never leaving Carter's. "Doesn't matter. I'm just waiting." There was something in the way Ethan stood that made Carter's temper flare. "You think you're too good for this street?" he snapped, moving in closer. He wasn't going to let this kid talk back to him like that. Without warning, Carter grabbed Ethan by the arm and spun him around. "You think you can stand there, looking all smug like that?" Carter's voice was laced with aggression, his grip tightening. Ethan winced slightly but didn't try to pull away. Instead, he stood still, as if he had anticipated the move. "You're hurting me," he said quietly, his voice steady but tinged with discomfort. Carter's eyes flashed. "Good," he muttered, pushing Ethan against the wall with more force than necessary. "Maybe this'll teach you respect." For a brief moment, the street seemed to go silent. The distant sounds of the city faded away as Carter's anger took over. He raised his hand, preparing to strike the kid. "You don't talk back to me, kid. Ever." His voice was low, deadly. But before his hand could make contact, the sound of a car pulling up interrupted him. Carter turned just in time to see a sleek black sedan pull up, its tires screeching slightly on the asphalt. The car door swung open, and out stepped a tall woman in a crisp black suit. She moved with purpose, her heels clicking sharply on the pavement. Carter froze. He didn't know why, but he recognized something about her. She was too confident, too poised, to just be another passerby. She was also staring directly at him. "Officer Carter," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "I think it's time you let the boy go." Carter's mouth went dry. He turned back to Ethan, who was still standing there, looking unfazed by the encounter. The officer's hand was still suspended in the air. "Who the hell are you?" Carter demanded, his anger rising again. The woman didn't flinch. She stepped closer, her gaze never leaving his. "I'm Assistant District Attorney Olivia Barnes," she said, her eyes now narrowing as she took in the scene. "And you're making a mistake." It hit Carter like a ton of bricks. He recognized her now. Olivia Barnes. The prosecutor. He had seen her name on the news a few times, particularly when she'd been making waves in high-profile cases against police misconduct. He had heard whispers about her, and about the investigation into his department, an investigation that had quietly been building for months. But he never thought it would come to this. You're the one investigating us," Carter stammered, his voice faltering for the first time. Olivia nodded, her expression cold but calculating. That's right. And the boy you've been harassing? She gestured toward Ethan. He's the prosecutor sent to work on the case. Ethan is the one assigned to investigate you and your colleagues for excessive use of force. Carter's stomach dropped. He felt the blood drain from his face. The realization hit him with a weight he hadn't been prepared for. You're joking, Carter muttered, his voice shaky. This is some kind of joke, right? But Olivia's face remained stern, unflinching. She stepped forward and pulled out her badge, holding it up for him to see. You've been under investigation for months. And now you've just sealed your own fate. Carter's mind raced as the pieces started to fall into place. All the complaints, all the rumors about his heavy-handed tactics, this was it. The very thing he had been trying to avoid had finally caught up with him. He glanced at Ethan again, who hadn't said a word this entire time. The teenager, this prosecutor, wasn't just some kid on the street. He had been silently documenting everything. Every moment, every interaction. And now, Ethan held the power to bring down everything Carter had worked for. Carter could feel his heart pounding in his chest. You can't do this. The words came out weakly, his tough exterior finally cracking. But Ethan stepped forward now, his eyes full of quiet determination. You did this to yourself, Officer Carter, he said softly. You used your badge as a weapon, and now you'll have to answer for it. Carter's world seemed to collapse in on itself. The case wasn't just some internal review anymore. It wasn't a distant investigation. It was personal. And now, his entire career, his life, was hanging by a thread. The following days were a blur. The investigation into Carter's conduct accelerated rapidly, and before long, every detail of his past transgressions was brought to light. The media seized upon the story, and the public was outraged. Carter was placed on administrative leave, pending the results of the investigation. But the worst part was the phone call. He had been fired. It was over. The career he had spent years building, the reputation he had tried so hard to maintain, had been destroyed in an instant. Ethan, the young prosecutor, had been the one to bring it all down. And as Carter packed up his desk and left the precinct for the last time, he couldn't help but think back to that moment, the one where he could have walked away. He could have let the kid go, could have taken a different route. But now, it was too late. In the end, the investigation had been more than just about police brutality. It had been about accountability. It had been about the weight of actions finally catching up with the ones who thought they were untouchable. And for Raymond Carter, it was the end of the road.